so I mean that's sort of similar to what the Brightspace that I shared with you. So is anybody else using virtual learning environment like that with their students, like Brightspace? Yeah. So you can use those, again they're a tool, you can use those in, there's loads of tools within those things, and you can use them in lots of different ways. A lot of them have wikis now. Does anybody use wikis with their students when they're doing projects? Wikis, just like an online kind of collaborative project space that people can add and comment and add resources and things like that. Okay, so what I want you to think about now, this is kind of a typical map, I suppose, of one of my students, or was it staff? I can't remember. Yeah, so here there's this term. This is so who's using a virtual learning environment like Moodle or what have you? Okay, so they've been kind of going and gaining popularity about the last sort of 20 years, and virtually every university in the UK. I mean, even 10 years ago, everybody was using these a lot. But then they became known as this kind of shovelware, because the academics would shovel on all the papers, and the students would shovel them all off again. And nobody, it didn't touch anybody's brain in between, So I think there was a tendency to, because it was so easy to upload loads and loads of resources, it's quite difficult for the students then to go, well, what's important here? What do I actually need to read? So they kind of evolved a little bit from there. Then there was also a phase where on these virtual learning environments, that all of the social media tools were then put on there. So there was, opportunities to have conversations and chats and discussions, kind of mimicking what you could do on Facebook and Twitter and things like that. But students didn't want to kind of come off their social media, go into the virtual learning environment, go into the app to go and use the tool. So there's still that tension between what you call do you give students confidence to in this kind of walled garden, so they share stuff within a small group within their course, but it's not affecting their kind of their public profile, or do you give them the skills to say, look, if you're going to post something, then you have to think about what you're saying. So that's the kind of debate that's going on. A lot of these tools here we've spoken about before: SlideShare, ResearchGate. There's sort of Snapchat for academia now, and there's used in universities, developing a LinkedIn profile. All of these things here can really help both your professional development and your professional profile, but also help your students, okay, to when they're going out into the world of work. So what we tend to find is academics use all of this stuff down here, where they're quite resident in their learning spaces. Students are very resident in social media, but they're not resident in anything that's to do with their learning. Okay, and they'll just use this down here, and they'll use these few tools up here. So they'll be resident on social media tools for engaging with their friends and what have you. And they'll use technology in a very much sort of shovelware thing, come and get it, but they're not having discussions. So is the way that students are using technology, is this actually a problem? Is the way that we're using technology with students, is there really a problem here? So I've sort of had some conversations with students about this, these statements are from quite a while ago, but the students that I was working with felt that they didn't make the best use of technology in either their learning or promoting their professional identity. They themselves have really recognised that they weren't using technology effectively to learn in a time-efficient way, in an effective way, to gather resources in an effective way, to be a bit more creative. And they also were worried about their professional identity. And they felt that the students themselves identified that they needed more support in using developing their digital capabilities. And then another interesting thing that the GISC, the guys that did that document I sent out to, they just published something yesterday, and I'll share that on the Brightspace with you. But their survey was saying that what students were saying was they don't want more tech, they don't want kind of tech everywhere, but they just want academics to be a bit more competent and a bit more selective about how they're using technology. So it actually kind of promotes these capabilities. So I'll share that article with you because I think it's quite an interesting read. So what I want you to do now, we said we finished at past, so we'll not spend too long doing this. I've got some cards here with some ideas about information literacies and some about digital literacies and some ideas about how you could use them in the classroom. So I just want you to kind of have a look through the cards, find one that appeals to you, and then work in groups of 5 or 6 to share, you know, why you think it's going to be useful and how you might use it. All right. So I'm afraid my cards are getting a bit tatty, but you'll see on the front of these cards. There's a kind of a headline sort of skill that you might want the students to develop. So one we've been talking about a lot, gather and find information and data, okay? And then on the back there'll be some ideas of how you can support people doing that. Planning, searching effectively. These, the kind of nice shiny ones are more about information literacy, and there's kind of cheap homemade ones that are digital capabilities. Okay, so have a look through those, pass them round, identify ones that appeal to you, and then kind of come back in groups of 4 or 5 to share what ones you think are most effective. So just make sure in your groups that you're not looking at the same ones. So I'll give you a few minutes to have a look, and then maybe 10 minutes to do the sharing. Okay, folks, I hope you all had a chance to think about different aspects. I just thought I'd share this with you before we move on. So this is from a few years ago, coming back to that idea of Google doesn't equal research and what have you. So this was a class I did, and it had 200 students in it, so it was a really massive first year class. And I was introducing them to some ideas around bioethics. So I asked them to bring at least one laptop in a group of 3 or 4 students, and mobile devices or tablets, whatever they had. And I asked them a question, which was, it was a very specific question. So it was, does the UK mainstream media, so the newspapers, the online TV, things like that, is it biased against genetically modified crops? Okay, so I didn't want them to look at research articles. I didn't want them to look outside the UK. I wanted to look at the mainstream media. Okay, so there was quite a specific sort of search characteristics. So if they just put GM foods in the Google search, they would get a lot of information that wasn't relevant to the question. So they had to learn how to use Google search and the search criteria to focus it down so it was UK based and the types of journals and articles they were looking at. I did this in a kind of a gamified way, so half the room had to find the pro articles and half the room had to find the anti articles. And I set up a spreadsheet in Google where they had to put what they'd found. So they had to put the source, what type of article it was, the date. So this was the date that it was published. And then they had to rate the evidence that they read. So when they read the article, they had to say how valid it was, how did they think it was biased, or did they think it was based on factual information. And they were commenting on it, and then they also had to say whether there was a scientific paper underpinning the article. So they were analysing in that way, and it was a very scaffolding way because I was asking them to get some specific information out. Because I kind of gamified it, it was a competition to see who could get the most articles. They couldn't repeat what somebody else had already put on there, so they had to get a little bit more sophisticated in their Google search because the first 10 everybody had already got in a massive class. So they had to start searching further and further down and think about more of the articles. So it was great fun. It was an absolute riot because they were kind of getting really noisy, trying to find stuff and really engaged in the activity. But underneath all of that, they were actually learning quite a lot of skills in terms of how you were a bit more strategic in your use of things like Google, because we were having a conversation there, and Google is the way that we're doing research now. That has such a huge resource that we need to use it effectively and understand how the Google algorithms work, at least on a surface level, so that we can find the information that we want. So And actually, I was just reading on Twitter there, somebody saying about there's a really nice citation to that in Google Docs, so I need to have a look at that afterwards. Anyway, so that was just a little bit of an aside following on the conversations there. I want to finish this today with coming back to your UK PSF. So we've done all this. Oh? Okay, so in your groups, thinking about those conversations you've already had, and thinking about either the ideas that you've just shared within your groups already, about how you're using technology. So this is quite a quick sort of task. I haven't put the Google Doc link up, so you can't do that bit. But if you can gather them all up on a bit of paper, I will add a Google Doc so you can add them later. Because I think it'd be useful for you to share them so you've got examples of how you think you can map them to actually I'll open up a Google Doc now, as soon as I've got Google open. So look at the examples that you've got, okay, and think about how it fits to UKPSF. So if you're doing that in the classroom now, how would you write about that in your professional fellowship application? Yeah, does that make sense? Okay, so for example, if I said, I'm using mobile technology in the classroom to undertake formative assessment, that would be K for knowledge of the learning environment, A for learning how people learn, I think it is, and V2 promoting participation. All right, so so those people this morning that maybe used Kahoot. Your lovely example using Kahoot to check understanding. That was a great example of formative assessment in the classroom that would hit these things, okay? So going back around to your group, the example that you gave, which which dimensions of your fellowship would that hit? Yeah? Okay? Everybody know what they're supposed to do? No. You don't know if it does? Yeah. Huh? You have to think about it. Do you want me to bring up a document that's got it on there? All the list of all the ones on there. Does anybody have them handy? Okay, should we just do it calling them out rather than writing them down? And then, because then we can discuss them. Okay, so that means I need to get my list. Oh, I've got it here. Okay. Right, I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about which ones you think it hits, and I'll try and open up a document on here that's got them on, yeah? That's probably the easiest thing.